Welcome to tonight's strange adventure, where philosophy gives way to beans and bacon. Everyone knows the Western Saloon, where whiskey flows like a river, the piano plays shabby music, and fights can break out because of a wrong look. But what do people really eat behind that swinging wooden door? Is it beans and bacon like in cowboy movies? Or is there another culinary mystery waiting for us to discover? Before we begin, turn on the soft yellow lights, turn on the fan to create a quiet wind like in the Old West, and come with me through the dusty saloon door. The first smell of the West, the first thing that hits your nose when you enter the saloon is not the sound of the piano or the sound of coins flying on the card table. It is the smell. A complex, top-notch smell, cowboy sweat horses that haven't been bathed in a month, musty cigarettes, old beer spilled on rotting wood floors, horses standing outside the door, and if you're lucky, a whiff of something, like cooking. Some saloons try to mask this smell by sprinkling sawdust on the floor or lighting pipes to the point of causing temporary amnesia. The rest who needs to breathe in here, the bartenders swatted flies away with grinning rags from the Civil War. The legendary kitchen behind the bar. Don't think that a saloon is all about alcohol. There's always a kitchen somewhere. Maybe a pit with a pot of beans cooking over hot coals. Maybe a grumpy hostess stirring a mysterious stew with a spoon that doubles as a weapon. The menu simple, no wooden board, no waiters. There are only a few shabby tables and chairs and a long counter, where you can eat, drink, and argue, even all three at the same time. If you are familiar, the chef will shout beans or stew, and you will nod. If you are a stranger, all eyes are fixed on you as if to ask, will he pay before he collapses? Beans, the uncrowned king of the saloon kitchen. The main food beans, pinto, black, white, as long as they are dry boil and do not go away on their own. Beans survive every gunfight, every rainy night, every drunken chef. The recipe: put beans in a pot, boil for 6 hours over a suspicious fire, add some salted meat, hard as rock biscuits, and the chef's worried eyes. Beans sustain cowboys on the road, give them energy to gamble all night, and are the cause of many biological disasters in the saloon. 10 cowboys eating beans at once. Key: low-level biological weapons. Legend has it that a man once traded horses for 3 pounds of salted beans and a promise not to return. Salted meat, the salty warrior of the West. If beans are the sole salted meat, is the greasy spine. Salted enough to withstand storms, brawls, and 6 months in a saddlebag without spoiling nor getting softer. Cooked right, it's crispy and fragrant. Cooked wrong, it's like chewing on a shoe sole soaked in wagon grease. But who cares? When a hot meal is 60 miles away, salted meat is a savior. Everything is cooked in its fat: potatoes, cakes, even soup. Is it green smells strange? No problem. The restaurant's motto: if you don't die, you're still good. Stew, the hungry cowboy's last gamble. Stew is the greatest culinary puzzle. Every pot has water, fire, and whatever can't keep up. Beef lucky, rabbit sure, squirrel snake. As long as you don't bite back, throw it all in the pot. Sometimes shoelaces float in. Guests notice, but still happily nibble, the easiest thing to chew in the pot. Vegetables, if there are any, they are cooked to a pulp like paper. Carrots become orange smudges. Onions disappear, the toughest potatoes give up. Spice is rare. Pepper is fancy. Chili powder. Congratulations, your sinuses are almost clean. But despite everything, stew is always a comfort. It is hot, filling, can be reheated until the third day when it has its own personality. Anyone who dares to ask what's in here receives a deadpan look from the chef. The end of a culinary journey full of asceticism. That's what saloon cuisine is like. Not for deliciousness, but for survival. Because after a bowl of beans, a piece of bacon, and a spoonful of mysterious stew, you have enough strength to sit through a few more games of cards, to travel 60 dusty miles, or even to get into a fight over some trivial reason. Western food does not captivate diners, but it helps them live a day longer, and sometimes that is enough. In the Wild West, ignorance wasn't just bliss, it was dinner. Not every cowboy could afford steak. In fact, most couldn't afford boots that matched or teeth that stayed put. But almost every saloon, no matter how dusty, questionable, or half-burned, had one thing bread like food to soak up whatever liquid luck was boiling in the kitchen. And this bread usually came in one of two forms: biscuits, soft, flaky, and warm if you were blessed by the food gods that day. Hardtack, basically bread's undead cousin that refused to die. Let's start with the biscuits. When done right, which was rare but practically religious, they were warm, buttery, and flaky enough to make a hardened outlaw believe he'd stumbled into heaven's breakfast buffet. Cooks who could make good biscuits were local legends. Some claimed their secret was lard as pure as angel tears. Others swore by buttermilk. A few probably just had low standards and high luck. These biscuits were best served next to beans or stew, perfect for mopping up broth, mystery grease, or whatever gravy didn't burn your tongue that night. They were baked in heavy, war-scarred cast iron pans, the same ones that doubled as self-defense weapons over open fires that tasted slightly of mesquite and regret. And if the saloon was fancy, meaning they hadn't run out of supplies that week, you might even get a slab of butter or a drizzle of molasses on top. Imagine that dessert and dinner in one dangerously unstable bite. Then there was hardtack, the opposite of joy. This slab of flour and water was baked into something so hard it could survive nuclear winter buffalo stampedes and marriage to a frontier widow. Originally made for soldiers and sailors, hardtack found its way west. For one simple reason, it never went bad. Probably because no living thing, not even mold, wanted to live in it. Calling it food was generous. Eating hardtack wasn't a meal. It was a battle of wills. First, you'd inspect for weevils because bugs meant protein, not a problem, just extra crunch. Then you soaked it stew, whiskey tears, anything wet, and waited. 10 minutes to soften, maybe. Some said a proper soak could take 2 presidential terms. Even soft hardtack was a fight. You didn't eat it, you wrestled it. Dentists made a fortune fixing the brave souls who lost molars to this devil biscuit. But it was cheap, unkillable, and filled your belly. And in a world where calories mattered more than taste, that was enough. So if you strolled into a saloon and saw fresh, steaming biscuits, you counted your blessings. If they slapped a hardtack puck the size of your palm in front of you, Well, at least it came with a story and maybe a chipped tooth. And then there was the coffee. Forget Starbucks. Forget lattes. In the Wild West, coffee wasn't a beverage. It was a survival tactic. A brew so strong it didn't just wake you up, it stared back and dared you to blink. Cowboy coffee was made of rough ground beans, or something they claimed was beans dumped into a pot of water that may or may not have come from a stream upstream of the horses. They boiled it hard. No filter, no gentle pour, no oat milk swirls. You dumped in the grounds. You boiled it until the liquid turned black and possibly gained sentience. The result, a dark, angry brew that smelled like burnt dreams and tasted like punishment. Drinking it meant swallowing grit soul and more coffee grounds than liquid in the last sip, meaning cowboys got both caffeine and fiber in one heroic gulp. And yet they loved it. It warmed frozen fingers on cold desert mornings. It kept men awake on lonely night watches. It burned away hangovers and helped digest questionable stew. Saloons didn't always serve coffee, but if they did, it was old. It was strong. It was thick enough to strip paint. One cowboy said it was like drinking a mule's kick, but you missed it when it was gone. Some places reheated the same pot all day long, resulting in the boldest brew west of the Mississippi, thick as tar and twice as bitter. But you drank it anyway, because out here coffee wasn't for pleasure, it was for staying alive. Meet the saloon lottery. Meat in the Wild West wasn't just food, it was currency, status, occasionally a test of bravery. If you had money and luck, you might order steak. What you got? Well, it depended on the cook's mood and whether he liked the look of your hat. Steak in theory was luxury. In reality, a leather-tough slab of beef fried in lard, charred into obedience and served without shame or garnish. Ask for it medium rare, and the cook would stare until your mustache wilted. No fresh beef, no problem. There was always jerky salted buffalo, maybe venison or wild boar, if someone got lucky hunting, and by lucky I mean shot it before the buzzards got there first. In mining towns, the menu got creative: squirrel stew, rattlesnake roast jackrabbit fried in mystery spice. If it had legs and wasn't someone's horse, it was dinner. Ask what meat it was. You didn't. You ate in silence. Find a whisker, sip your whiskey and keep quiet. Poke it and it twitches. Congratulations, you've earned the right to raise an eyebrow, but nothing more. But sometimes the meat was fresh, the cook was sober, and the plate was hot, sizzling beef, fried egg on top, biscuit on the side. A rare moment where life in the West almost felt worth it. Dessert, you mean? Cornbread. Dessert in a saloon wasn't a category. It was an accident. But if luck smiled, there was cornbread. Cornbread, the frontier's Swiss Army knife, made from cornmeal water or milk if the cow hadn't run off, and maybe baking powder if the cook was feeling wild. Baked, fried, or dropped into stew, cornbread showed up everywhere. Alone, it was dry and crumbly, like eating a sandstorm. Fresh, almost never. Usually you got a piece that had been warming near the stove since sunrise, hard as a banker's heart. But then came Salvation molasses. Dark, sticky sweet, the Cowboys frosting. It turned dry crumbs into glory. If a saloon had molasses and warmed it before serving, you were practically dining at a five-star frontier joint. Cornbread with molasses was the outlaw's cake. No frosting, no sprinkles, just grit grain and gooey joy after a long ride or a lost poker hand. And that was enough, because in a life of dust, danger, and desperate stew, sometimes you just needed a bite that reminded you the West wasn't all death and dirt. Wild West saloon food, a gamble on a plate. In the Wild West, eggs weren't so much cooked as they were punished, fried until the yolks turned to leather, wobbling on your plate like they'd lost the will to live. If the eggs jiggled, that was the universe's way of whispering, "Order whiskey instead." Chicken made rare appearances. If the menu promised fried chicken, odds were high, you'd get a scrawny, bitter old bird that died angry, tough, bony, and fried in lard until flavor itself gave up. But it was hot, it wasn't beans again, and that counted. You might get a thumb-sized drumstick or a quarter roasted over open flame, maybe with a feather still waving in your gravy. Part of the charm. Eggs and chicken were saloon status symbols. They screamed, "We serve food that didn't arrive in a barrel." A breakfast that didn't poison you was rare, and word spread fast if the eggs were warm and the chicken not dry as driftwood. But if they gave you food poisoning, well, that was just the West reminding you who ran the show. But there was hope on the menu. Pie. Yes, pie. In the Wild West, a pie wasn't dessert, it was a statement, a miracle. If you saw one steaming on the bar, golden crust glinting in the lamplight, you knew this saloon cared. Someone in that filthy kitchen actually tried. That was practically a love letter in a land of bean mush and burned pork. Now don't imagine a perfect lattice-top beauty filled with fresh-picked fruit. These pies were ugly, crust uneven, filling made from canned or dried fruit, sometimes barely warm. Whipped cream. Not unless a cow wandered into town behind you. Apple, peach, berry, the holy trinity. Berry being a loose term that could mean raisins, or anything vaguely plant-based. A good day meant a dash of cinnamon. A bad day meant crushed sugar and a prayer. But still, pie was rare magic. Cowboys hadn't seen one since Mama's kitchen, and saloons knew a warm slice could draw customers from 2 towns over. A hot pie could start fights. It did start fights. More than one poker game ended in gunfire over dessert rights. You took the last slice as serious a crime as cheating at cards. In a world where men stabbed over spilled whiskey, pie was sacred. Of course, not all pies were blessings. Some were mostly crust. Some hinted at fruit. Some were tragic experiments. But once in a while, sober cook, hot oven edible filling, you'd get a slice worth remembering. Hope served on a tin plate. Then there was cheese. Cheese in the West was like poker, a gamble with a whiff of regret. It existed, yes, but fresh wrapped, civilized cheese, dream on. You got hard yellow lumps or soft sweaty blobs that smelled like old promises. Refrigeration luxury. If you found cheese, it meant someone nearby had a cow, and no cattle rustlers yet. Flavor? Not the point. Cheese was bravado. Civilization. The whisper of Europe in a world that smelled of sweat and gunpowder. You didn't question cheese. You sniffed, tapped it with your fork, and ate it anyway. If it squeaked, that was between you and fate. And pickles pickling was salvation. No fridge, no problem. Everything got pickled: cucumbers, eggs, onions, mystery meat, floating in cloudy jars behind the bar like haunted eyeballs. Taste depends. Fresh pickles were crunchy and sharp. Old ones tasted like rainwater and regret. Pickled eggs were protein shots for the desperate. Some men swore by them. Others swore at them. Pickled onions chased away bad breath and were suitors. Even pickled peaches, soaked in sweet brine, showed up not dessert, not dinner, just vinegary confusion. But hey, they lasted. When the stew was moving on its own and the beans were burnt, black pickles waited patiently, a salty, sour safety net. You didn't eat them because they were delicious. You ate them because they would probably let you live another day. And then there was the king of all saloon staples, whiskey. Always there, always ready. Whiskey didn't need cooking. It didn't need salt. It needed nerve. Rough, raw, and deadly, the drink of broken ribs, broken hearts, and broken dreams. Made from corn rye or moonshine mystery mix, distilled in barns, backrooms, and bathtubs. It could clean wounds, strip paint, start fights, end friendships. Whiskey wasn't just alcohol, it was dinner, survival juice, 3 shots before a duel, 2 after. Special deals came with beans or biscuits, not flavor, but ballast. Some men drank whiskey with pickled eggs in the glass, protein and regret in one gulp. You judged a saloon by its whiskey knockdown time. Quick floor collapse, strong house, mild buzz, probably kerosene. Additives included tobacco juice and cayenne, because why not suffer twice? But no one complained. Whiskey was the only honest menu item. It burned, it cured, it forgot like a hot slap in a cold room. When the food was scary, and the cook scarier, whiskey was the way out. Ah yes, the cook, the unseen ruler of the saloon. Forget the sheriff or preacher. The cook held true power. Beard stubbled, apron-stained eyes, tired from wrestling bad meat. Ex-miners, ex-cons, ex-somethings. No training, just fire smoke in one iron pan unwashed since the gold rush. A good day chili so fine you wept. Warm biscuits, cornbread that whispered of home. A bad day scorched beans, gray meat stew with an oily skin that shifted when the pot stilled. But you never complained. Ever. The cook decided who ate fresh and who got last night's horror reheated with hope. They were bouncers too. One glare, one greasy ladle, one meat cleaver, and a bar cleared faster than gunfire. Respect the cook, love the cook, fear the cook, because your stomach and possibly your life lay in their greasy, glorious hands. So here's the final question. Would you eat Wild West saloon food? Honestly, modern stomachs wouldn't last. Beans basic, meat a gamble, stew, questionable life forms included. You'd need teeth like iron and the hunger of a dust-choked cowboy who hadn't seen real food in days. But back then, you'd eat it. You'd love it. You'd scrape the bowl, suck the gravy off your thumb, order seconds with coins that smelled like dynamite and desperation. Because in the Wild West, food wasn't flavor, it was survival. From ink of life to living ink, a journey of storytelling through flesh and blood. From stone and sand to pork ribs and whiskey. Smell that. Yeah, that's right. It's the smell of horse sweat, charred, grilled meat, and freshly baked apple pie. Welcome to a Wild West saloon, where dinner isn't Michelin-starred, just fire salt and lots of gossip. There you can laugh heartily with strangers, curse the chef without holding back, clink whiskey glasses like keyboard warriors before social media. And if you're lucky and with a slice of apple pie and a remarkable story to retell, because the food in the saloon isn't fancy, it's greasy, rough, and real. In a world where things are wilder than the imagination of cowboy movies, that's enough. Rewind from tattoo hipster to Ice Age needle. Before ink on skin was hyped as a symbol of rebellion in EDM blasting tattoo parlors, it used to be ancient marks etched on the body, not for fashion, but for survival. Don't believe it? Meet our frozen friend Otzi the Iceman. Discovered in 1991, lying intact in the ice between the borders of Austria and Italy, Otzi's body had been dormant for over 5,000 years. Older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. But what made scientists gape wasn't his age, but tattoos. A total of 61 tattoos, all dots and lines running along his spine around his knees and ankles. No skulls or the word mom, just positions, coinciding with modern acupuncture points. Was this an ancient pain relief therapy or a spiritual endurance ritual? We can't be sure. But one thing is clear, humans have been etching meaning onto their skin since before there was a calendar. From Egyptian dance to the power of fertility, in ancient Egypt, women, especially dancers and priestesses, were the first living ink devotees. The tattoos weren't butterflies or ex-boyfriends' names, but sacred symbols usually located around the abdomen, thighs, and breasts. The purpose to protect during childbirth, increase fertility, or ward off evil spirits. A form of spiritual armor worn for life. In Nubia, the southern region, mummies were excavated, showing animal tattoos such as crocodiles and cows, symbols of strength and survival. For them, tattooing was not rebellion, but ritual. It's an eternal prayer printed on the skin. Polynesia, when tattoos are a life passport. If you think tattoos are just for coolness, try standing in front of a Polynesian chief and saying that. You might get tattooed with a look of contempt, because their tattoos are the soul of a person. In fact, the word tattoo comes from the Tahitian word tato, which means to tap. And yes, people use fish bones dipped in charcoal ink, then tapped each line onto the skin with a stick. No anesthesia, no ointment, just pain, acceptance, and ritual. For the Maori people of New Zealand, the face is not just a face, it's a living resume. The intricate lines tell of origins, lineage, and feats. Erasing a tattoo is like erasing a person's entire life. Then came the colonial era. Europeans brought soap, scissors, and judgment. They considered tattoos barbaric and heretical. Some places even banned tattooing, pushing this culture into the shadows. But like all sacred values, it still lived underground. And now the sound of tattoo is echoing again. Not just art, but cultural rebirth. From swords to mirrors, the story of Greece and Rome. You think Greek statues are pristine white with flawless bodies wrong? Ancient Greece used tattoos to mark criminals and slaves. The word stigma, you know the root of stigmatize, originally meant an ink mark on the forehead so others could read, "I used to run away." The Romans were more pragmatic. Special Forces soldiers were tattooed for identification. Gladiators and prisoners of war permanently stamped with ink, but not to be cool, but to be owned. Interestingly, Christians were once tattooed in humiliation, but then tattooed themselves. Going on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, remember to show off the cross tattoo on your arm, like a train ticket to heaven. And Emperor Constantine, despite legalizing Christianity, still banned tattooing the face, because the face is the image of God. The body, feel free to tattoo. The Orient tattooing to protect the soul and resist prejudice. In India, although famous for henna, tribal people also have a tradition of permanent tattooing. Small images represent fertility, strength, and faith, like jewelry for the soul, something no one can take away. And Japan, a roller coaster of prejudice. Early on, tattoos seemed spiritual, even noble. Then in the Edo period, tattoo, punishment. Thieves were clearly marked, Osaka criminal here, maximum shame level. But then the outcasts, firefighters, laborers, and later the Yakuza, countered prejudice with art. They tattooed their entire bodies with dragons, tigers, myths. Painful for hundreds of hours, but each image is a personal epic. From pain to pride, from frozen mountain peaks to the shores of the Pacific, from slaves to warriors, from nuns to dancers, tattoos have always been a wordless language. Each line of ink is a story. It could be pain, it could be reverence, it could be unyielding courage. So the next time you see someone with a strange tattoo, don't judge. Who knows, they might be carrying an entire civilization on their skin, inked beneath society's judgment. At the same time, Buddhist pilgrims in Southeast Asia developed Sakyant tattoos, geometric designs, and Pali scriptures believed to offer protection, strength, and spiritual blessings. These were administered by monks using sharpened bamboo or steel rods, and always accompanied by chants and prayer. In the East, tattoos could be holy or taboo, sacred or criminal. It all depended on who wore them and why. But one thing was certain. In these cultures, skin was never silent. It spoke of power, punishment, prayer, and pride. As the Roman Empire gave way to the rise of Christianity, the tattoo needle, once a symbol of identity or punishment, began to vanish from the Western world. Why? Because in the eyes of the church, the body was no longer just flesh. It was a temple, and temples apparently weren't meant to be scribbled on. The early Christians had a complex relationship with tattoos. On one hand, some groups adopted tattoos as declarations of faith. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem would have small crosses tattooed on their wrists to signify their devotion, a permanent spiritual passport. These were symbols of endurance and survival, proof they had made the sacred journey and lived to tell the tale. But that was the exception, not the rule. By the early Middle Ages, the dominant message coming from religious authorities was clear. Marking the body was a pagan practice, and pagan meant sinful. The Bible, specifically Leviticus 19:28, was often cited, "You shall not make any cutings in your flesh, for the dead nor tattoo any marks upon you. I am the Lord." That single line was enough to bury an entire art form across much of medieval Europe. Tattoos became synonymous with heathenism, witchcraft, and heresy. Not something you wanted associated with your name during the Inquisition. In monasteries and Christian kingdoms, tattooing virtually disappeared, reduced to whispers and superstition. But even in this era of suppression, the ink never truly dried. In the far reaches of the Byzantine Empire, some Christian sects still practiced religious tattooing, small crosses etched onto hands and arms, often to protect against Islamic enslavement. In Ethiopia, Coptic Christians maintained tattoo traditions as well, marking young believers with sacred symbols as part of spiritual rituals. And among crusaders, the knights who marched to the Holy Land tattoos made a quiet return. Some etched small crosses on their bodies, not just as spiritual protection, but so that if they died in battle, they could be buried as Christians, their faith visible even in death. So while the medieval West tried to erase the art of tattooing, it never quite succeeded. The ink hid in monasteries, pilgrim trails, and desert churches, waiting patiently like a buried relic for its time to rise again. As the age of exploration dawned and wooden ships began slicing through unknown oceans, tattoos found a brand new canvas: sailors. And these weren't royal court artists or tribal shamans. These were rough men calloused by salt and superstition who began decorating their bodies with anchors, mermaids, and crucifixes. But how did tattoos return to Europe after centuries in exile enter the 18th century voyages of Captain James Cook? When his crew arrived in Paulina, they encountered entire societies marked in ink. Intrigued and amazed, many sailors got tattooed themselves both to honor the cultures they encountered and, let's be honest, to prove they'd been somewhere exotic. Returning to port with tattoos wasn't just fashionable. It was a kind of resume, a living record of where you'd sailed and what you'd survived. Soon tattoos became the unofficial uniform of the seafaring class. But it wasn't just about style, it was steeped in superstition. An anchor on the forearm symbolized stability. A pig and a rooster, often tattooed on the feet, were believed to prevent drowning, since those animals were kept in wooden crates that floated during shipwrecks. Some sailors even tattooed "hold fast" across their knuckles, hoping it would give them the grip to survive rough seas and tangled ropes. And then there were the religious icons: crosses on the back, the Virgin Mary over the heart. Sailors believed these tattoos offered divine protection, an extra layer of spiritual armor when the ocean turned against them. As these inked-up sailors filtered back into European and American ports, tattoos spread with them not to the nobility, but to the fringes, dock workers, soldiers, convicts. Tattoos were now the language of the lower classes, the drifters, and the daring. Still, they held meaning. In the U.S. Civil War, soldiers began tattooing their names and regiments on their arms, a grim preparation in case they died in battle and needed identification, a small, painful insurance policy in a world without dog tags. So while kings and clergy shunned tattoos, the men who mapped the world wore them with pride. For them, each mark was a story, a wound, a charm, a prayer. And when the world ended in waves or cannon fire, it might be the only thing left that told your name. By the 19th and 20th centuries, tattoos had drifted far from temples and tribal rites. In many parts of the world, they had become marks of defiance, especially behind bars. Prisons gave tattoos a new language, a gritty coded one spoken in needles, razors, and improvised ink. Let's start in Russia. Under the iron shadow of the Soviet Union, a secret society of tattoos flourished inside the gulags. These weren't decorative. They were biographical, symbolic, ruthlessly hierarchical. a star on the shoulders. That meant you commanded respect. Barbed wire around the neck. You were a lifer never getting out. A cathedral with domes on your chest. Each dome represented a sentence served. The tattoos told your crimes, your rank, your defiance. But break the code or wear a symbol you hadn't earned, and you might find it carved off forcibly with a knife. In Japan, the Yakuza transformed the art of irumi, once a punishment, into a badge of honor. Full-body suits of dragons, koi-ish, and samurai warriors, covered skin from shoulder to ankle, often hidden beneath business suits. Getting tattooed wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was a rite of loyalty, painful, expensive, and permanent. In the West, prison tattoos carried their own meanings. In American jails, a teardrop beneath the eye might signal that you've committed murder, or in some cases, lost someone close. Cobwebs on the elbows could symbolize long sentences, dots on the knuckles, numbers, acronyms, entire identities rewritten in ink, hidden from guards but clear to anyone fluent in the language. These tattoos were often done with smuggled sewing needles, paper clips, and pens melted into ink. There was no glamour here, just pain and symbolism. For many inmates, it was less about art and more about identity, proof that you belonged or a warning that you didn't. Outside prison walls, these tattoos carried a heavy stigma. They marked you as dangerous, untouchable, beyond redemption. But for the men and women who wore them, the ink was often the only constant, the only part of themselves they owned in a system built to strip everything else away. Tattoos in prison weren't fashion. They were survival. By the time the 20th century hit full stride, tattoos had gone from sacred symbols and outlaw code to mainstream rebellion. If the church once saw tattoos as marks of sin, modern society started to see them as symbols of freedom and occasionally of a very specific kind of cool. In the early 1900s, you could still catch tattooed performers in circus sideshows, tattooed ladies and illustrated men who charged admission to show off their fully inked skin. People gasped. They stared. It was taboo wrapped in spectacle. But something began to shift around the middle of the century. Soldiers returning from World War II brought back simple tattoos, anchors, eagles' hearts with mom scrolled inside, as personal emblems of pain, patriotism, or survival. These tattoos weren't for show. They were keepsakes burned into the skin as reminders of the things they'd seen and the brothers they'd lost. Then came the counterculture. In the 1960s and 70s, tattoos began breaking out of their blue-collar roots and onto the bodies of rock stars, bikers, and beat poets. Janis Joplin had a bracelet tattooed on her wrist. The Hells Angels wore ink like a badge of honor. The act of getting a tattoo, still a bit frowned upon by polite society, became an act of rebellion, a way to say, I don't care what you think. And tattoo parlors. They were no longer hidden dens in city alleyways. They started to go legit. Artists like Lyle Tuttle, who famously inked Sure and the Rolling Stones, turned the needle into a brush. Suddenly, tattoos weren't just symbols. They were statements, personal, political, powerful. But the stigma didn't vanish overnight. Even into the 1990s and early 2000s, having visible tattoos could keep you from getting hired. No visible tattoos was printed right into many job applications. Ink still whispered of crime, deviant, or recklessness, especially for women whose tattooed bodies were policed more harshly. And yet the tide was turning. Tattoo TV shows emerged. Celebrities embraced full sleeves. Tattoo conventions popped up everywhere. The art form was no longer a subculture, it was culture. From rebellion to runway tattoos had finally re-entered the mainstream. But they never forgot their roots. In a world where everything from our voices to our memories lives in the cloud, you'd think something as analog as a tattoo might be left behind. But instead, tattoos have entered a renaissance, not just surviving the digital age, but evolving with it. Today, tattoos are more than ink and skin. They're powered by apps, augmented by tech, and designed with machines that would make 19th century sailors weep. Some artists now use AI to generate hyper-detailed designs. Others work with machines that print ink with surgical precision. And then there's the rise of smart tattoos, experimental patches embedded with sensors capable of tracking vitals, controlling devices, or even lighting up with LED ink. It's not science fiction, it's already being tested in labs. But even without the tech, tattoos are booming. What was once taboo is now celebrated across professions, genders, and cultures. Doctors have full sleeves. Teachers wear wristbands of ink. CEOs stroll into boardrooms with elaborate back pieces hidden beneath suits. Social media has democratized the art form. A tattoo in Seoul can go viral in Seattle. Artists build global audiences overnight, and customers can book a session with the tap of a phone. And yet the meaning behind tattoos hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's become more personal. People now tattoo sound waves of loved ones' voices, coordinates of where they met their partners, portraits of pets' constellations from their child's birth night, quotes in forgotten languages etched forever to remember, to heal, to belong. Cultural tattooing is resurging too. Indigenous communities from the Arctic to the Andes are reviving ancestral designs, reclaiming identity through skin. What was once suppressed is now proudly worn, a walking act of remembrance. Of course, debates still rage. Is it art or trend, sacred or superficial? Can you truly own your story if it's filtered through algorithms and likes? But maybe that's the point. Tattoos have always lived in that gray area between pain and beauty, permanence and transformation. They are both primal and futuristic, a whisper from the past and a declaration for tomorrow. And as long as humans crave meaning, memory, and mark-making, tattoos will endure. Beneath the surface, ink will always speak even when words cannot. Before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand. Before kings trembled at her name, Tamias was simply a daughter of the wind. Born to the raw, open steppe, the land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the massage, fierce nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains, their lives shaped by survival, honor, and war. We know little of Tomias's childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run to shoot, before she could speak in full sentences. Among the massage girls were not caged in, tense or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead one had to bleed, and Tomias, even as a young woman, bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun, and sky lived off their herds and buried their dead with weapons ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride. And when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tamias likely came to power after the death of her husband who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't inherit leadership. She seized it. In a time when most women were considered property, Tomius commanded an army. She negotiated with kings. She dared to speak as an equal. And if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen. She was Shahut the Steppes' checkmate, a war chief in bronze and leather, who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power especially, for a woman never comes without consequence. As Tomius began to solidify her rule, whispers grew louder. Across the mountains to the south, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set, the steppe wind howled, and Tomius' daughter of warriors would soon ride into legend. While Tomius reigned over the open steppes far to the south, a different kind of power was rising. Structured, imperial, relentless. Cyrus, the great founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages changed every few days' ride. But Cyrus wasn't done. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually eyes the horizon. To Cyrus, the Massage were a threat wrapped in opportunity. They weren't rich in gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontier, and that meant access to key lands, resources, and trade routes. More importantly, the Massage Day had something no empire could afford to ignore: pride. And pride in Cyrus's eyes could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew that brute force wasn't always the best first move. He had a reputation for cleverness, diplomacy, and strategic trickery. So he tried a different approach, one that kings before him had used to dissolve threats without a single drop of blood. He proposed marriage. According to ancient sources, notably, Herodotus Cyrus sent envoys to Tomius, offering an alliance through matrimony. On paper, it was a royal match: the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the Mahete. But Tomius wasn't naive. She saw the proposal for what it was: not an offer of love or partnership, but a calculated attempt to absorb her people without a fight. She declined, and that rejection didn't sit well in the halls of Peopolus. With the diplomatic games over, Cyrus shifted to his favorite language war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier that separated Persia from the land of the Masti. He was going to take what Tomius refused to give. But Tomius was already preparing. She knew the terrain. She knew how her people fought on horseback, fast and furious. And most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming to crush a woman who dared to say no. The world's most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury he had just awakened on the steppe. Cyrus, the great master strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed he could outwit us. He had faced kings, crushed cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massage were little more than wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to defend. He didn't realize he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and far more furious. Tomius had warned him. After rejecting his marriage offer, she sent a clear message: cross the Araxes River and you will regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his army into Massage land. Instead of striking immediately, Tomius pulled her forces back, luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The Persians found an abandoned camp well stocked with food and, more importantly, wine, a luxury the nomadic Massagette rarely indulged in. It was a baited trap, and Cyrus took it perhaps thinking the enemy had panicked and fled. Inside the camp, he left a portion of his army under the command of General Harpagus, a trusted officer. As the Massachets returned under the cover of night, they fell upon the drunk and unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was brutal and swift. Among the dead was Sparapaces, Tomios' son, and a massage commander. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Sparapaces was taken alive and, realizing his capture, begged for death and took his own life. Others claim he was killed in the fighting. But all agree. When news reached to something inside her, shattered and then turned to steel. Her grief was volcanic, but her rage that became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This one wasn't a warning. It was a vow. "You may be a glutton for blood," she said, "but I swear I will give you your fill." She promised to make the sea ground run red with Persian blood, and her vengeance would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son. He had violated her land. Now he would meet not the queen of the mass, but the mother of a slain warrior, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be a skirmish. It would be an execution. The sun rose over the plains like a blade sharp and blinding. Tamira stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but a storm-given form. Her warriors, hardened by the nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and rage. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about blood. Cyrus, for all his might, had underestimated the massage. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered before. Chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush. But Tomios had spent her life among warriors. She understood how to strike not blindly, but with precision. She rallied her forces for a full-scale assault on the Persian invaders. And this time, she wasn't holding back. The location of the final battle is lost to history, swallowed by the vastness of the steppe. But what's clear is that Tomios launched a ferocious counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a tide of knives. They fired arrows from horseback, closed in with axes, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, battle-hardened, disciplined, and experienced, weren't expecting this level of organized fury. Tomios didn't just lead her troops. She fought beside them. Her presence on the battlefield ignited her warriors like wildfire. Every strike was driven by vengeance. Every charge was an answer to her son's death. Cyrus tried to hold the line, but it shattered. The Persians were routed. Many died where they stood. Others fled into the endless grasslands only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the known world, fell in the chaos. Whether he was slain in combat or captured and executed depends on the version told, but either way, he died on Tomios' terms. What came next is infamous. According to Herodotus, Tomios found Cyrus's body on the battlefield, ordered his head severed, and then, in a final act of symbolic revenge, submerged it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you thirsted for." Was it historical fact or poetic embellishment? Maybe both, but it didn't matter. The message was eternal. Tomios was not to be conquered. When the dust settled and the grass drank deep, the blood of empire, Tomios stood victorious. A warrior queen who had done what no king or army before her could. She brought Cyrus the Great to his end. News of the defeat sent shockwaves across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought to be unstoppable, had been humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians did their best to downplay the loss, but the death of their founder couldn't be ignored. Cyrus's body was eventually returned and buried with honor in the royal tomb at Pasaragi. Yet the stain of his final defeat would linger like a wound on the empire's legacy. For Ptolemus and the Majete, however, the victory was more than revenge. It was a declaration. They had defended their sovereignty not just with weapons, but with dignity. Ptolemus had stood up to the world's most powerful ruler, and she hadn't just survived, she had triumphed. And then she vanished from history. No records survive detailing her later years, her death, or any successes she may have appointed. It's as if after taking her vengeance, Tamiya simply rode back into the horizon and allowed the wind to carry her legend forward. In the centuries that followed, historians, poets, and chroniclers would try to fill in the blanks, turning her into a symbol as much as a woman. To the Persians, her name was a bitter reminder. To the Greeks, she was a paradox, a barbarian who displayed more nobility than many kings. And to the peoples of Central Asia, Tamias became folklore, a ghostly queen who rides through the steppe fierce and unbending, with a sword that remembers. Her legacy would inspire countless depictions across cultures. Medieval manuscripts portrayed her in regal armor. Renaissance paintings imagined her towering over Cyrus's corpse. In every age, she became what people needed: a mother avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in hubris, or a symbol of feminine power. But one truth cuts through the myth. She changed history. Tamias didn't inherit a throne. She forged it in fire and fury. And for one brief, unforgettable moment, the Steppe Queen proved that not all empires rise. Some fall to the hooves of warriors who ride with vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Thomas comes not from local massage records. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the pen of a Greek Herodotus, often called the father of history. Writing a century after her time, he immortalized Ptolemus in his histories, casting her as a warrior queen of astonishing resolve and terrifying vengeance. But Herodotus wasn't simply reporting facts. He was weaving a story, one part chronicle, one part morality tale. To him and his Greek audience, Tamias represented the ultimate reversal of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, a man who had conquered half the known world, fell not to a vast army or a rival king, but to a woman who fought not for glory, but for her child. Her victory was almost mythic, and Herodotus treated it as such. He even detailed her grisly revenge, the wineskin of blood, the severed head of Cyrus, and her damning words, "Drink your fill." But was it true? Modern historians debate this endlessly. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated or even invented parts of the tale, using Tamiris as a narrative tool to humble the Persian Empire, which at the time of his writing was still a looming force over the Greek world. Others believe that while the blood wineskin episode might be symbolic, the core event, Cyrus's death at the hands of Tamiris, likely did happen. There's also the question of bias. Herodotus, for all his insight, often filtered foreign cultures through a Greek lens. He portrayed the Maset as wild and free, yet noble and exotic mirror to Greek ideals of honor and liberty. Tamias, in that frame, wasn't just a barbarian. She was a moral counterweight to Persian ambition. Still, even if details blurred over time, Herodotus succeeded in one thing. He ensured Tamias would not be forgotten. Because of him, she became more than a historical footnote. She entered the realm of legend where facts soften, but impact sharpens. And in that space between myth and memory, Tomias's story found a strange kind of immortality. In a world dominated by kings and conquerors, Herodotus left us a queen who refused to kneel and left her enemies bleeding in the sand. Though she may have slain one of the ancient world's most iconic emperors, Tamias never ruled an empire herself. She didn't build cities of stone or inscribe edicts on golden tablets. Her people, the Magi, were nomads living not by walls, but by the rhythms of the land, the sky, and the horse. This meant that Tomias's legacy was never institutionalized. There were no marble busts or royal coins bearing her likeness, no archives to immortalize her decrees. Instead, her story passed on, as stories do, on the Step Through Firelight song and the whispered awe of warriors. The Mage were one of many powerful tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Their cousins included the Sayans, the Saka, and the Dahai, all expert horse archers who roamed the lands between the Caspian Sea and the borders of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their mobility, unpredictability, and ferocity in battle. Tomias, as a female leader among them, was rare but not entirely unique. Steppe culture, unlike many sedentary civilizations, allowed women far greater freedoms. Women rode, hunted, fought, and even led. Among the Scythians, graves of female warriors buried with weapons, armor, and horse gear have been found by archaeologists, confirming that the stories of fierce steppe queens were more than just legend. Tamias stood at the pinnacle of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from respect, grit, and sheer capability. She was a unifying force. Among scattered clans, a political leader and a military commander. In a landscape where survival meant riding faster, shooting better, and fearing nothing. But because the massage left no monuments, Tomias became a kind of phantom queen, her name echoing only in the writings of outsiders and in the oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribe, she was a warning, to the Greeks a marvel, and to her people likely a memory carried in bloodlines and battle songs, a ghost who rode with them across the plains. Empires may rise and fall in stone, but the stories of the steppe live on in the wind. And Tamira's fierce grieving and unbroken became its voice. Centuries passed, and the empires that once surrounded the Massagite rose and crumbled. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and faded into the dusty footnotes of time. But to her legend endured not in the palaces of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a symbol of female strength, of resistance, of the untamed spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tomias embodied a kind of defiance that transcended geography. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian, and so her story belonged to no empire. That made her dangerous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally mentioned her name reshaped by language, but never quite forgotten. In some versions, she was praised for her justice and vengeance. In others, she was seen as a savage queen, a reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both glorious and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, European artists rediscovered her tale through the writings of Herodotus. Painters depicted her in elaborate armor, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic painting, she holds his severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-soaked and victorious. It was theatrical, yes, but also political. These artists were fascinated by the idea of a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world, she won. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tamias became a nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, proof that the roots of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud, and deeply feminine. Her name appeared in textbook statues and even military ceremonies. A woman who had once ruled on horseback with a bow in hand was now riding once more, through memory and myth, through rebellion and pride. In a world that still wrestles with the idea of powerful women, Tamias remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect, saintly, or tame. She was decisive, brutal when necessary, compassionate only to those who deserved it. She was resistance in human form, and the blood of empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favor the builders of monuments, the writers of laws, the kings who carved their names into stone. Tamias did none of these. She left no empire behind, no palace to excavate, no royal seal to decipher, and yet her name still lives. Not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a contradiction to how history often remembers women, not as helpmates or footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tamias didn't beg for recognition. She took it with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king. She rode against one and won. Her story is retold in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not simply because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending an empire. She was defending freedom, a freedom that rode on the backs of horses, that hunted with hawks, that slept under the stars, a freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map. Today, her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face adorns coins and textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she is a mother of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past, a reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the gallop of horses. In a world still divided by power, by gender, by memory, Tamias is a beacon not just because she killed a great king, but because she taught us something even greater. That dignity is not given, it is seized. That sometimes leadership looks like a mother grieving her son and refusing to let the killer walk away. We often wonder why some names survive while others vanish. Tamias survived because she was unforgettable. Because in a time when women were expected to disappear into the tents of men, she rose blade in, hand, fury, and heart, and carved her story into the flesh of history. Empires fall, statues crumble, but legends ride. And somewhere in the whispering winds of the steppe, the queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. Long before encryption, keys, and surveillance cameras, there was a simpler concern. How do I keep my stuff safe from nosy neighbors, wandering animals, and ambitious thieves? As human societies shifted from nomadic bands to settled civilizations, possessions accumulated, and with possessions came problems, envy, theft, and the need to secure. The instinct to protect what we value is ancient, primal even. Once humans began storing food tools or sacred items in permanent dwellings or temples, they had to find a way to keep others out. But how do you guard something when you can't stand watch forever? The answer: invent a mechanism to do it for you. The earliest known attempt at mechanical security dates back to ancient Egypt, roughly 4,000 years ago. And what's astonishing is not just that. They had locks. It's that the basic principle behind their invention still exists today. The Egyptian wooden pin lock was a marvel of early engineering. It used a wooden bolt fitted with a set of holes and wooden pegs. When the correct key, often a large wooden tool with corresponding pins, was inserted, the pegs lifted, allowing the bolt to slide open. Remove the key and gravity dropped the pins back into place, sealing the door. This wasn't a novelty. These locks were used on storage rooms, tombs, and even temple gates. They were installed vertically, often on the inside of doors, to make tampering harder. While they may seem primitive by today's standards, the brilliance of these early systems lies in their underlying logic. They weren't merely barriers, they were puzzles. And like all good puzzles, they challenge the uninvited. What's more, these locks reveal something deeper about the people who made them. They didn't just fear theft, they anticipated it. They thought ahead. They invested time and skill in protecting things that mattered. And in doing so, they laid the groundwork for an entire field of human innovation security. So the next time you lock your front door, remember you're not just turning a deadbolt. You're continuing a tradition started by ancient hands, driven by a timeless truth. Some things are worth guarding. The Egyptian wooden pin lock wasn't just the world's first known lock. It was also the ancestor of nearly every pin tumbler mechanism used today. Simple, elegant, and surprisingly effective. It served temples, homes, and storage rooms across ancient Egypt for centuries. And it all started with a few pieces of wood, a bit of clever design, and a deep need for privacy. Imagine a large wooden door, not one with hinges like today's, but more like a vertical plank barrier. On the inside of that door sits a wooden bolt that slides horizontally to block the entrance. But embedded within that bolt are several holes, and inside each hole rests a wooden peg. Those pegs drop into slots, cut into the door frame itself, preventing the bolt from sliding open. It's locked. Now here's the magic. The key, a large wooden implement resembling a modern toothbrush, has corresponding pegs or pins that match the positions of those in the bolt. Insert the key into the bolt, and the pins inside are pushed up just enough to clear the frame slots. Once lifted, the bolt can slide open freely. Remove the key and gravity does the rest. The pins fall back into the frame holes, relocking the door. It's mechanical memory without springs or gears, just wood weight and ingenuity. What made this system so impressive was its balance of complexity and reliability. It was relatively easy to craft using available materials, but hard to bypass without the correct key. And since each lock was slightly different thanks to hand-carving keys weren't interchangeable, your lock was your lock. These pin locks weren't reserved just for the rich or royal either. Archaeological findings at sites like Nineveh, and even later at Persian and Assyrian locations, show the concept spread widely across ancient civilizations. Egypt may have invented the idea, but the lock had legs. Beyond practical use, these locks carried symbolic power. In tombs and sacred buildings, locking something wasn't just about physical protection. It signified reverence, finality. The belief that certain things should remain untouched unless you were worthy enough to possess the key. Security in ancient Egypt wasn't just a function, it was a statement. While Egypt gave us the earliest mechanical locks, ancient Mesopotamia pioneered a very different form of security, one that relied less on mechanics and more on identity. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, security wasn't sealed with bolts and tumblers. It was pressed in clay with symbols, authority, and trust. The people of Mesopotamia, including the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, developed a method of securing goods not by locking them, but by making unauthorized access visibly impossible. How with cylinder seals? Small carved stone rollers engraved with unique images or inscriptions. These seals were rolled over wet clay used to close containers' doors or even official documents. Think of it as an ancient combination of a signature, a wax seal, and a barcode. Once impressed into the clay, the seal left behind a continuous pattern that could not be duplicated easily. If someone tampered with the seal, opened the container, broke the door latch, or unwrapped the tablet, it was obvious the broken clay told on them. This approach was both simple and profound. In a world without padlocks or alarms, it focused on deterrence through visibility. The seal didn't stop you from opening something. It told the world that you had. High-ranking officials, merchants, and priests all had their own personalized cylinder seals, often passed down through generations. These seals carried such prestige that some people were even buried with them as status symbols and tools of the afterlife. But Mesopotamian security wasn't just about clay. They also secured temple treasuries and granaries using rope bindings that could only be removed by cutting, often tied with elaborate knots, or seals that would clearly show tampering. The idea was always the same: make the risk of exposure more terrifying than the reward of theft. This concept of security as accountability, of linking access to a person's identity and social status, would echo for millennia. Even today, we log in with usernames, verify with signatures, and rely on records more than locks. In Mesopotamia, to protect something wasn't just to keep it hidden, it was to publicly proclaim who had the right to touch it. As ancient Greek city-states rose in wealth and complexity, so too did their need for personal security. From treasuries and temples to coin-filled storerooms and private homes, the Greeks faced the same age-old challenge. How do you keep things safe when you can't always be there to guard them? Surprisingly, the Greeks were slower than their Egyptian and Mesopotamian neighbors in developing mechanical locks. Instead, they leaned heavily on trust, social norms, and physical barriers, sometimes reinforced by surprisingly clever, though rudimentary, devices. One such innovation was the bar and pin lock, used mostly for doors and chests. It consisted of a horizontal bar placed across a door on the inside, with a hole through which a key could be inserted from the outside to lift the bar. These keys were often large flat iron rods, shaped like the letter F or P. They weren't the most discreet. In fact, some were almost as long as a forearm. Carrying one around made it quite obvious that you had something to protect. But Greek keys and locks weren't just functional. They also held cultural significance. Being entrusted with a key symbolized authority and responsibility. In Homer's Odyssey, Penelope is described as holding the key to Odysseus's storeroom, a symbol of her power within the household. However, Greek locks had limitations. They were often crude, easily forced, and dependent on physical size more than subtlety. What truly kept valuables secure was often a combination of concealment guards and communal expectations. In temples and state treasuries, rooms were sealed with rope and wax, with the city-state holding multiple keys, requiring several officials to be present to open a sacred store. Even homes were designed with layered access, multiple rooms, limited entry points, and gates that could be barred from within. Wealthy homes might employ slaves or hired guards to watch over valuables, adding a human layer of protection to the relatively simple mechanical devices. While the Greeks admired cleverness, mates, the cunning intelligence, they didn't yet channel it into lock making the way later civilizations would. Still, they laid the cultural groundwork. Keys as symbols of status, access as a matter of trust, and security as a balance between strength and social control. If the Egyptians gave us the concept of the pin lock and the Greeks what trust into tradition, it was the Romans who truly elevated lock-making, akin into a practical art. With their metallurgical skill, obsession with order, and vast bureaucracy, the Romans brought precision, portability, and innovation to ancient security. And their ideas still echo through modern locks today. Roman locks were primarily made of bronze and iron, allowing for much greater durability and smaller, more intricate designs than their wooden predecessors. They adopted the Egyptian pin tumbler principle, but miniaturized it, refined it, and in some cases completely reinvented it. Roman locksmiths created warded locks which used internal obstacles or wards that only allowed a properly shaped key to rotate and unlock the mechanism. This meant that simply inserting any tool wouldn't work. The key had to match the internal layout. Their keys, by the way, were marvels in themselves. Made from iron or bronze, Roman keys came in all sizes, from large staff-like keys used for city gates to finely crafted ring keys worn on the finger-like jewelry. These ring keys didn't just look elegant. They served a functional purpose, offering constant access to locked boxes or cabinets without the need to carry bulky tools. It was status and utility wrapped in metal. But the real genius came with Roman puzzle locks. Complex mechanisms hidden inside ornate boxes where pressing the wrong latch or turning the wrong angle wouldn't just fail, it might trap the lock tighter. These were used not only for securing valuables, but for hiding documents, religious relics, or even poison, a favorite trick in Roman political circles. Romans also institutionalized lock usage. Banks, granaries, merchant chests, and military storerooms all used locks. Doors had metal plates, gates had locking bars, and even slaves might be locked in with iron collars that had keys only their masters held. To the Romans, a lock wasn't just a tool, it was a statement. It declared ownership, authority, and exclusion. And it gave rise to the idea that a truly civilized society needed more than just walls to protect it. It needed systems. While the West was forging intricate metal locks, ancient China took a path that blended practicality with philosophy. Chinese engineers, ever pragmatic, developed locking systems that were simple, durable, and often symbolic, where the design of a lock didn't just protect an object, but carried deeper meaning. The most common form of ancient Chinese lock was the sliding bolt lock, a mechanism made primarily from bronze or iron. These locks typically consisted of a hollow metal case housing a sliding bolt secured by spring-loaded tumblers. Insert the right key, usually a flat, ridged metal stick, and the tumblers would align, allowing the bolt to slide and the lock to open. Sound familiar? It should. The core principle behind the modern pin tumbler lock was already alive in Han Dynasty China as early as 200 BCE. Unlike Roman locks, which often featured external keyholes and decorative flair, Chinese locks were compact, discreet, and portable. Many were used to secure chests, gates, jewelry boxes, and doors. And the emphasis was on function, not just form. But Chinese locks were more than mechanical devices. They were often cast in the shape of animals, tigers, dragons, turtles, or inscribed with symbols representing luck, protection, or wealth. A lock shaped like a fish might be placed on a money box, symbolizing abundance. A dragon lock on a door wasn't just for security. It warned intruders that a powerful force guarded what lay beyond. Locks also played ceremonial roles. During weddings, love locks were sometimes used to bind symbolic boxes or chests representing the couple's bond. The key would be handed over as part of the marriage ritual, a gesture of trust and commitment. Some locks, particularly puzzle locks, were designed to confuse thieves. They had hidden mechanisms, false keyholes, or required a specific sequence of movements to open. Not because they were necessarily harder to break, but because they bought time. In ancient times, delay could be the difference between a foiled theft and a successful one. Ultimately, Chinese security culture wasn't built around brute denial of access, but rather harmony between utility symbolism and clever design. In that blend of form and function, they developed a quiet legacy, one that continues in subtle locks and symbolic rituals to this day. In ancient India, security was less about brute force and more about clever concealment, symbolic barriers, and layered protection, blending spirituality with ingenuity. Indian locks weren't just meant to keep people out. They were designed to confuse, mislead, and warn, often integrating secret latches, false compartments, or symbolic inscriptions to elevate security into an almost philosophical practice. One of the standout features of Indian lock-making was the use of deception. Puzzle locks and trick mechanisms became common in temples and treasure chests, not to prevent brute force entry entirely, but to make it complicated enough to discourage it. Some locks required multiple actions. Press one hidden button, twist a second lever, and only then would the key turn. Others had decoy keyholes that served no purpose except to trick the uninvited. Temple security especially saw intricate applications. Temples housed offerings of gold, sacred texts, and revered relics. Instead of simply hiding these behind locked doors, priests often layered security, not just physically, but ritually. The storage area might be sealed with wax-knotted rope and a stamped clay emblem, each bearing spiritual weight. Breaking that seal wasn't just a crime, it was considered a sacrilege. Locks themselves were frequently engraved with religious imagery of protection. The ancient art of locks, elephants, lotus flowers, deities, protective mantras, ancient Indian locks were not merely mechanical devices. They were symbols of cosmic and spiritual defense. To tamper with such a lock without permission was not just theft, it was an insult to the gods themselves. In royal courts and bustling merchant caravans, locks secured scrolls, trade chests, and private chambers. Crafted from iron or brass, they were designed to be light yet resilient. Each key was unique, sometimes the sole creation of a single artisan, ensuring that only the rightful owner could unlock its secrets. Beyond mere security, these locks held ceremonial weight. In marriage rites or inheritance ceremonies, the opening of a chest marked not just access to treasure, but the passing of legacy, trust, and duty. For ancient India, the perfect lock did more than seal it, whispered, "Only the worthy may pass." Locks on the move security for the ancient world. As civilizations stretched their reach from Roman outposts to Chinese marketplaces, the need for portable, tamper-resistant locks grew urgent. Merchants hauling silk spices, glassware coins, and scrolls across continents faced dangers on every road: bandits, dishonest porters, opportunistic locals. Roman traders armed themselves with iron padlocks, spring-loaded ring keys small enough for a saddlebag, sturdy enough for a warehouse. These locks have been unearthed from Britain to Syria, silent proof of a universal concern: how to protect wealth that must travel. In China, bronze sliding locks fastened to chests and carts. Cleverly disguised as ornaments or inlays, they marked ownership and made tampering obvious and shameful. Breaking such a lock was a crime against honor as well as property. Even nomads on the Central Asian steppes devised leather and metal clasps to secure tent flaps, horse packs, and weapon caches, fast, visible, simple. On battlefields, generals locked weapon stores, treasury wagons, and command tents. Important scrolls were sealed in multi-keyed chests, requiring 2 or more officers to open, a primitive form of two-factor authentication. Across cultures, as trade expanded and war spread, locks became both tool and signal. They said to the world, "Here lies something worth stealing. Beware the owner." The unbroken story of security. When you twist a key or tap a passcode today, you touch an inheritance stretching back thousands of years. Every latch click and coded lock screen echoes the silent workshops of Egypt, the forges of Rome, the market stalls of Chang'an. But the story of locks is not merely mechanical, it is psychological. Locks define boundaries. This is mine. You may not cross. Whether a bolt in Thebes, a ring key in Pompeii, or a puzzle lock in ancient India, the principle remained: protect, exclude, control. Locks secured more than valuables. They safeguarded secrets, sealed power, and defended the sacred. A temple door bolt protected faith itself. A scroll's wax seal guarded knowledge, authority, and trust. Even today, we lock diaries, wedding chests, vaults, not just for safety, but as a declaration of privacy, ownership, and trust. And despite centuries of evolution, little has changed. Modern tumbler locks mimic Egyptian models. Passcodes and blockchain security echo ancient fears of intrusion and desire for certainty. But no lock was ever perfect, not then, not now. Every lock could be broken, picked, bypassed. Their true power lay not in their parts, but in their message. You do not have permission. That boundary, the invisible line between mine and yours, is the enduring genius of locks. It matters not whether the guard is a wooden bar or an encrypted firewall. The purpose remains the same: to hold back the world. So next time you hear a safe click shut or feel a deadbolt slide home, remember you're not just securing a room. You are part of an ancient story written by kings, warriors, traders, and priests who all trusted the quiet strength of a lock to guard what they cherished most.